South African authorities are in Tanzania to facilitate the return of convicted rapist and killer Thabo Bester and his companion, Dr. Nandipha Magudumana. This happens as a former G4S employee, Senohe Matsoara, and Dr. Nandipha's father, Zolile Sekeleni, appeared before the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court today. They've been remanded in custody and will appear again in court on the 17th of April. We're now joined by legal expert Ulrich Roux to see how these processes usually play themselves out, especially when accused are beyond South African borders. Ulrich, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Typically, how does it work when accused persons are not in South Africa? They're in the borders of another country in terms of bringing them back into the country.
Hi, good afternoon for having me. Yes, there's two distinct processes that can be followed. In this instance, it has been determined that both Thabo Bester and Dr. Magudumana are illegal in Tanzania and that they fraudulently entered the borders of Tanzania. And in accordance with that, they are merely going to be deported back to South Africa as part of a mutual legal assistance agreement between the South African and the Tanzanian authorities in order for them to face charges in South Africa that will be instituted against them. This is different from an extradition where a person has committed a criminal offense, in this instance in South Africa. They are arrested in a different country and then they are through legal processes deported back to South Africa. So once again, it has been confirmed that they will merely be deported back to South Africa now because of the fact that they are illegal in Tanzania.
Given that they were found apparently or allegedly with a number of passports and their own passports were not stamped, what other avenues would be available to them in terms of the laws of that country that could complicate this extradition process, if at all?
Well, one would have to wait and see whether there is an opportunity granted to them to fight their deportation to South Africa. They would have to then make it a case to say that they are indeed legal in Tanzania and that they are permitted to stay in Tanzania. But from what it seems, they're going to have great difficulty in doing that, given that they entered the country unlawfully and that they fraudulently used fake identities and passports in order to do so. So one could expect them to merely now go through the deportation process in Tanzania, given that they are illegal in that country.
And typically, how long does that take?
Well, one would have to wait and see now. From what I understand, there are discussions, talks, and open lines of communication between the South African and the Tanzanian authorities. And one would accordingly think that it would be quite a swift process. But I would be hesitant to predict exactly how long that would take. Hopefully a couple of weeks.
What charges do you perceive they will be faced with upon their return to South Africa?
Well, Thabo Bester has, of course, been convicted of murder and rape, and he will be deported back to South Africa to continue serving the sentence imposed upon him after those convictions. But also he will now be charged with escaping from prison, as well as the fraud that he has committed, as well as the possible charges to be brought against him in accordance with the dead body that was found in his cell when he committed fraud in making the officials believe that it was in fact him. So additional charges of both arson and fraud and escaping police custody will be brought against him. Dr. Magudumana faces charges in terms of the Human Tissue Act of 1965, given the fact that she fraudulently made use of 3 dead bodies which she allegedly sold to Thabo Bester and his associates in order to facilitate his escape from prison. He can also be charged with aiding and abetting a criminal, given that he resided with her in her Hyde Park property. And she essentially hid him from the authorities. And then she will also be charged with fraud and contravention of the immigration law. So a host of charges additional charges that will be brought against Thabo Bester, and then those additional charges against Dr. Magudumana as well.
Is this something unusual, especially from the work that you do? I think the only thing I could think of is Ananias Mate when he escaped from prison. But in terms of this couple and the allegations they're faced with and the charges they're faced with, is this something unusual?
Yes, it's certainly a very unique case. I'm not sure if there has been a case such as this before in South Africa, where the accused went to great lengths and elaborately planned the escape of Thabo Bester. It's of course also, horrific to think that another person's dead body was smuggled into a prison and then posed as the dead body of Thabo Bester. Also that he committed arson, possibly together with a number of the D4S officials in that prison in order to escape. So it's certainly a very unique set of facts, and I think it is commendable that the South African police were able to track Thabo Bester and Dr. Magudumana so quickly after it came to light. But it is, of course, very concerning that this escape in fact took place, and one could expect all of the parties involved, specifically the G4S officials in charge with running that prison, to also be charged. It's clear that large-scale corruption took place there, and that they assisted Thabo Bester in facilitating his escape from prison. And this is something that is very concerning to society, that officials who are in charge of a prison can in fact assist a prisoner in escaping. And I think that a clear message must be sent out by the National Prosecuting Authority and the South African Police that this cannot be tolerated, and that any officials who commit corruption and fraud in the prison system will be brought to book, and that this we will accordingly and hopefully be able to prevent this from happening again in the future.
Is it clear to you that this is an open and shut case, especially where the two accused who are being held in Tanzania are concerned? The burden of proof, Ulrich, apparently or allegedly one of the bodies, especially the one that was burnt in prison, has already been cremated according to some reports. So there's still so much or so many pieces to this puzzle that would need to be proved, no?
Well, it's never an open and shut case. There's always evidence in any matter that needs to be properly evaluated by a competent court and an objective court. And the burden of proof is, of course, one beyond a reasonable doubt. So the state will have to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But certainly, at this stage, it is a fact that he did successfully escape from police custody whilst he was serving a lengthy prison sentence, and that they have been apprehended in Tanzania after having made use of fraudulent passports and contravening the immigration law. So, I do think that there is a hefty investigation that is awaiting the police in order to finalize the investigation and present a proper case docket to the National Prosecuting Authority. But it does seem at this stage, and obviously we have not seen any of the evidence, it does seem as if they are on the right track, and one would have to wait and see what in fact comes out in court when that evidence is presented. But certainly no case can ever be seen as an open and shut case.
Ulrich Roux is a legal expert. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.